Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today our mission is to look at a 2026 book by Boris Kriger. It's called A Little Planet for a Single Rose. And we're taking a stack of Kriger's analysis to answer a pretty wild question. What if the ultimate synthesis of 20th century philosophy like distilling Plato, Sartre, the Stoics, and the absolute horrors of World War II, what if all of that wasn't written in some massive, impenetrable academic tome?
Right, like a heavy textbook.
Exactly. What if it was actually hidden inside a 100-page children's book with watercolors?
Yeah.
About a little golden-haired boy who lives on an asteroid.
I mean, it sounds totally counterintuitive, right? But that is exactly Krieger's argument. Most people, they think of The Little Prince as this charming, maybe slightly melancholy fairy tale that you read to kids before bed. But if you actually unpack the mechanics of what Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is doing, you find one of the most, well, concentrated, rigorous works of modern philosophy that we have.
And to really get how a children's book carries that kind of weight, we have to ground this deep dive in the actual reality of the man who wrote it.
Right.
Because Saint-Exupéry was not, he wasn't some frail, delicate intellectual sitting in a pristine Parisian cafe, just theorizing about life from a safe distance.
Far from it. Yeah, we really have to strip away the myth here and look at the physical reality of the author. I mean, Saint-Exupéry was a giant of a man. He was over 6 feet tall, which, for his generation was exceptionally large. And in the 1920s, he was physically cramming himself into the cockpits of these early Latécoe mail planes.
Which were open cockpit, right?
Yes, open cockpit routes right over the Sahara Desert. He was part of this whole era where aviators had to navigate by the stars. Or like by literally looking down and physically following dry riverbeds when their rudimentary compasses just failed.
Right, so the danger wasn't some theoretical concept for him. It was absolute. Like in 1935, he and his mechanic actually crashed their plane in the Libyan desert. They spent days out there, pretty much dying of thirst. They experienced profound sensory deprivation, hallucinations, the whole thing. And they were saved at the absolute last minute by a passing Bedouin.
Yeah, it was a terrifying ordeal.
So when you open The Little Prince and you read about a pilot stranded in the desert trying to fix his engine, that is not just a cute literary device. That's a direct traumatic memory.
Exactly. And that physical reality is so crucial for understanding the mental reality of where he was when he finally sat down to write the book. Because, by 1942, France had fallen to the Nazis. Exupéry is living in this really miserable, isolated exile in a New York apartment. He doesn't speak English. He's politically alienated from the Vichy government back home. But he also, he intensely clashes with Charles de Gaulle's Free French movement.
So he's just completely unmoored.
Completely. And he's sitting at a lunch with his American publishers just obsessively drawing this little boy on a tablecloth.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Because I hear what Kriger is saying about this book being a profound philosophical text. But let's look at the context here. The guy is in exile, his country is occupied, his career is completely halted, and he's deeply depressed. Isn't it, just as likely that he was completely traumatized and wrote a fairy tale just to escape the nightmare of the real world?
It's a very fair question.
Right. Because if you read the text, there is this striking absence of World War II. I mean, there are no tanks, no soldiers, no Hitler, none of it.
It is a very natural assumption to make. But Kriger argues that this absence, it isn't escapism at all. It's actually a highly calculated, profound political act. Like, think about the nature of fascism for a second. Fascism fundamentally crushes the individual for the sake of the macro system. It demands that the state matters, the machinery matters, the uniform matters. But the small, the fragile, the individual, they do not matter at all.
Oh, wow. Okay, so by entirely ignoring the machinery of the war, he is basically refusing to play on their terms.
Precisely. If you connect this to the bigger picture of what other writers were doing in 1942, think of Camus or Sartre or Orwell, they were addressing the political machinery directly. But Exupéry was attempting to document the actual value of what was being destroyed.
It's like a filmmaker choosing to shoot this quiet, intimate indie movie about a garden right in the middle of a massive Michael Bay explosion.
That's a great analogy, yeah. He is trying to remind people what a human-scale life actually tastes like. Because if you don't remind people what a single, fragile life is worth, you forget what you were fighting the bombers for in the first place. He's using a child's voice to argue that, a single rose and a wild fox are the things that are actually worth defending.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But if he is defending the human-scale life against this massive political machinery, how does he convince us, like the readers, to actually see the world that way. Because as adults, we are totally conditioned by society to ignore the small, fragile things, right?
Yeah.
We just prioritize the big, serious stuff.
And that brings us exactly to the book's entrance exam. Exupéry knows his audience has been conditioned, so he tests them immediately with the most famous drawing in the book, the boa constrictor digesting an elephant.
Yes.
Oh, I love this part. The narrator explains that as a 6-year-old, he drew a picture of a boa constrictor that had swallowed an elephant whole. And to anyone looking at it, it essentially just looks like a lumpy hill.
Right.
And he proudly shows it to the grown-ups, and every single one of them says, "Why would we be frightened by a hat?"
Exactly. And Kriger points out that this is an epistemological test. It's a deep exploration of how we acquire and validate knowledge. In Exupéry's framework, adulthood is not a chronological age, right? It is an epistemological stance. Adults look at the outline, they look at the surface, they see a shape that superficially resembles a hat, and their inquiry just stops right there.
They don't dig deeper.
No, they don't. Children, however, look at the inside. They look for the essence of the thing.
So what does this all mean for us? Because the adults failing to see the elephant, it isn't about them being stupid, right? It's a trained behavior. Kriger calls it a policy of inattention.
Yes, a policy.
They have actively trained themselves to expect the ordinary just to function in the world. It's like wearing noise-canceling headphones to survive your daily commute. Sure, that policy protects you from being completely overwhelmed by the screeching of the subway, but you end up missing the actual music of life. You filter out the wonder. So, I mean, how many boas in your own life have you dismissed as just boring hats because of your adult policy of inattention?
That is the exact question he wants you to ask. And that policy of inattention reaches its devastating peak later in the story when the boy meets the geographer.
Oh, the geographer. Yeah.
The geographer is this rigid scholar who meticulously maps the oceans, the mountains, and the deserts. But when the boy asks him to record his beautiful rose on the map, the geographer flat out refuses.
Because the rose is ephemeral.
Exactly. The geographer explains that official knowledge only catalogs the permanent. But think about the tragedy of that stance. Official adult knowledge systems systematically exclude the very things that give a human life its actual meaning. A mountain is permanent, yes, but you don't love a mountain the way you love a fragile flower. By only valuing what lasts forever, the adult mind completely misses where life actually happens.
So if the adult policy of inattention blinds us to the ephemeral things, how are we supposed to figure out what actually matters? For Exupéry, the answer isn't some neat, tidy idea. It's a painfully difficult, high-maintenance flower. We have to talk about the rose.
We do. We definitely have to talk about the rose, because she represents Exupéry's real-life wife, Consuelo. And the text does not shy away from how difficult she is. I mean, she's vain, she lies to the boy, she complains constantly. And she has these 4 pathetic little thorns that she genuinely thinks can defend her against the whole world.
And the boy, who is super young and inexperienced, is just exhausted by her. He makes a classic human mistake, I think. He confuses her difficulty with a lack of value. He thinks, she's too hard to deal with, so I must not truly love her. And he abandons her to go explore the universe.
Which is a very relatable impulse. But that decision completely shatters when he eventually lands on Earth. He walks into a garden and is confronted by 5,000 roses that look exactly like his rose back home, and he just collapses in the dirt and weeps.
It's a brutal existential crisis. He realizes his rose isn't objectively unique in the universe. He feels like a total fraud, and he feels like his love was just a lie.
And this is the moment the fox enters. The fox delivers the core philosophy of the entire book. He introduces the concept of apprivoiser. Now, in English, this is usually translated as to tame, which unfortunately implies subjugation, like breaking a wild horse. But in French, the nuance is much closer to creating bonds, to slowly, patiently weaving 2 lives together.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the cognitive mechanism here is what is so fascinating. The radical philosophy the Fox teaches is that singularity, being unique, is not an innate quality. Your beloved is not objectively, magically unique in the universe from the exact moment you meet them. They become unique because of the time and attention you deposit into them.
Yes.
It's almost like the IKEA effect of human relationships.
Yeah.
We value things exponentially more when we pour our own labor, our suffering, and our time into them. The boy realizes his rose is unique because he watered her. He listened to her complain. He suffered for her.
Uniqueness is a construction project. It requires active labor. Water, listening, patience, these things build the bond. And this realization leads to the fox's heaviest warning. He says, you become responsible forever for what you have tamed. Forever. Kriger connects this to the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, and it's a staggering thought. Levinas argued that responsibility to the other isn't a casual choice you just opt into. It's a permanent structural fact created by the encounter itself. The bond literally alters the architecture of who you are.
Wait, I have to push back on this. Doesn't that put an absolutely crushing weight on a person? I mean, the modern world tells us the exact opposite. Today's culture is all about, cutting out toxicity, dropping relationships that don't serve our personal growth, and just moving on without guilt. But Exupéry and Levinas seem to be saying we are permanently on the hook for anyone we've ever paid attention to. That sounds like a trap.
I get why it sounds that way. It is a heavyweight, but it's crucial to understand that neither Exupéry nor Levinas are saying you must physically stay in an abusive or destructive situation. I mean, the boy did leave his planet, after all.
Right, he did leave.
What the philosophy suggests is that even if you leave, the responsibility doesn't just magically evaporate as if the relationship never happened. You cannot unknow someone. The bond altered your psychology, and it altered theirs. You walk away with a remainder, a permanent trace of that obligation. Even if that obligation just transforms into a duty to act with care in the future and to honor the fact that something was built, you don't get to erase the history just because it's inconvenient now.
Man, that requires a terrifying amount of vulnerability. You are basically allowing yourself to be permanently marked by someone else. And the boy learns that this kind of deep connection requires ritual, patience, and time. So what happens when you refuse that vulnerability? Exupéry shows us exactly what that looks like through the grown-ups the boy meets on the various asteroids.
Oh, absolutely. Those asteroid inhabitants are a masterclass in existential loneliness. They represent what the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre would call bad faith.
Let's actually define that for the listener, because bad faith is a pretty heavy term. What does Sartre mean by that in this context?
Right, so in existentialism, bad faith is essentially lying to yourself about your own freedom. Human freedom is terrifying, right? We are completely responsible for making our own meaning in a chaotic universe. So to escape that dread, people adopt these rigid labels or roles. They say, I am a waiter, or I am a businessman, and they act like a programmed machine because it's easier than facing the terrifying responsibility of making real human choices.
They just play a part.
Exactly. These grown-ups have organized their lives around closed, recursive loops just to avoid real human contact.
That perfectly describes the king and the vain man. They suffer from this intense performative loneliness. The king has absolutely no subjects on his tiny planet, but he sits there issuing orders anyway to the empty air. And the vain man has no audience, but he tips his hat to applause that isn't there. They are starving for mirrors, just playing a role with no reality behind it.
And the most biting critique is the businessman. He sits at a desk, aggressively counting the stars, claiming he owns them simply because he counted them and wrote the number on a piece of paper. He does absolutely nothing for the stars. He doesn't water them or protect them.
He just hoards them?
Right. Kriger compares him to modern hedge fund managers who own derivatives of buildings they will never walk into or resources they will never touch. They have reduced the vibrant reality of the world to mere bookkeeping.
It is exactly like a person today doom-scrolling and counting social media followers. You obsess over this ledger of empty numbers, convincing yourself that this metric equals connection, while you sit in a room entirely alone, completely ignoring the actual world around you. But wait, why does the boy judge the businessman so harshly, but he totally respects the lamplighter? Because the lamplighter's job seems just as pointless.
It's a really great distinction to make. The lamplighter lives on a planet that spins once a minute, so he has to light and extinguish his street lamp 60 times an hour.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting, and the task is objectively absurd. But the boy says the lamplighter is the only one he could have been friends with. Why? Because the lamplighter is doing it for something other than himself.
Okay. It's a portrait of stoic duty.
Exactly. He represents the modern teacher, the doctor, the frontline worker doing a faithful, exhausting job on a planet that has accelerated into absolute absurdity. The velocity of the modern world makes the work seem pointless, but the faithfulness to the task, the dedication to providing light for someone else is what keeps the worker human. He is the only one who isn't in bad faith.
And Exupéry really hammers home this critique of modern philosophy when the boy finally reaches Earth. He meets the switchman, who is sorting trains full of dissatisfied people rushing endlessly from one place to another, never happy where they are. And then he meets the merchant, who sells a pill that quenches thirst so you can save 53 minutes a week. The boy's response is so beautifully grounded. He says if he had 53 minutes, he would simply walk slowly to a fountain.
That is the ultimate critique of our cult of efficiency. We are so obsessed with saving time, but for what? To rush to the next empty destination. The boy understands that the journey, the physical sensory act of walking to the water, is the entire point of the experience. The friction of life is where the meaning lives.
Which brings us to the final and honestly the most difficult part of the deep dive. The boy has seen the emptiness of the adult world. He has learned the true mechanics of connection from the fox. He knows he has a permanent responsibility to his rose. But to fulfill that obligation, he has to cross the ultimate threshold. We have to look at the book's perspective on mortality.
Yeah, we reach the climax in the desert. The pilot and the boy are completely out of water, and they walk through the night until they find an old village well hidden in the sand. When they finally draw the water and drink, the pilot realizes the water tastes sweet. Not because of its chemical makeup, but because of the shared effort. Yes. The long walk under the stars, the physical strain of the heavy pulley, the song the rusty wheel makes. This proves the operational definition of the book's most famous line. What is essential is invisible to the eye.
The essential thing isn't the H2O, right? It's the bond they built, walking to it.
Yeah.
But their time is up. The yellow snake appears. The snake represents the threshold of death. The boy tells the pilot he has to go back to his star to take care of his fragile rose. But the journey across the universe is too far, and his physical body is, as he says, too heavy to take home. So he consciously chooses to let the yellow snake bite him.
It's a heartbreaking scene, and Kriger highlights this as one of the most remarkable texts in literature on how to process grief. Notice that the book doesn't offer some magical resurrection. The pilot looks the next morning, and the boy's physical body is gone. The body is finished.
Right.
But Exterior is arguing that the relationship survives in the inner life of the bereaved. The pilot looks up at the stars and hears the boy laughing in the night sky. The absence of the physical body is not the end of the bond.
Which makes the real-life parallel absolutely chilling to me. On July 31st, 1944, just a year after the book was published, Antoine of Saint-Exupéry took off in an unarmed P-38 Lightning reconnaissance plane to fly a mission over occupied France, and he vanished over the Mediterranean. Just like the boy, he disappeared. His body was never found.
Never found.
It wasn't until 1998 that a fisherman pulled up Exupéry's silver identity bracelet in his nets. When you read a book about a boy leaving his heavy body behind, written by a pilot who was about to literally disappear into the sky, it changes how you read it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, does it turn a philosophical fable into an intentional advanced consolation letter to the world?
I think it is almost impossible not to read it that way. The overlap between his art and his life is absolute. He lived his own metaphor. He wrote a manual on how to survive his own absence. He told us ahead of time that the body is just a shell and that the relationships we build, the time we patiently deposit into each other, will outlast the physical form.
So, synthesizing all of this, if we step back from the watercolors and the fairy tale aesthetics, what is The Little Prince actually doing?
It is an urgent manual for adults. It teaches us to aggressively bracket our adult assumptions, to realize that uniqueness isn't something you just magically stumble upon in the world. It is something you build through deliberate time and care. It teaches that fragility is a feature of life, not a bug to be fixed by building emotional security systems. And most importantly, it tells us to use the heart as an actual organ of perception, to look past the surface and see the invisible bonds that hold the universe together.
Which leaves you, the listener, with one final challenging thought to mull over based on the text. Remember the geographer, the one who refused to record the boy's rose because it was ephemeral, preferring to map only permanent mountains and oceans. Look closely at your own life. Are you acting as the rigid geographer of your own existence? You probably meticulously track your 401k, your career milestones, your daily schedules, the permanent, serious things. But are you entirely failing to record or pay attention to the fragile, ephemeral roses in your daily life? Because at the end of it all, when your time runs out, those fragile things you thought were distractions will actually be the only things that mattered.
The heavy volumes of philosophy tell us how to analyze the world. But this small book tells us how to actually live in it.
So next time you find yourself trying to make sense of it all, maybe skip the massive textbooks and pick up the watercolors. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking beneath the surface, and remember, the essential is always invisible to the eye.